Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we share powerful tales of kindness, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. Today's story takes you on a gripping journey of a man, a stolen dog, and an unlikely alliance that reminds us all of the profound strength found in solidarity and compassion. Stay tuned. The subway station at Jackson Street was a place of contrasts, where the restless energy of the day gave way to an eerie stillness at night. The hum of distant trains and faint echoes of hurried footsteps reverberated through the cold concrete walls. Ethan Cole, a renowned actor, stepped cautiously into the station. His casual attire, a pair of worn jeans, a faded denim jacket, and an old baseball cap made him blend effortlessly into the crowd. But his aura of quiet dignity couldn't be masked. He wasn't there for the glamour of the spotlight or the adoration of fans. Tonight, like many others, he was just another face among the city's forgotten. Trailing at his side was Charlie, a sprightly beagle puppy with curious eyes and a wagging tail. Charlie wasn't technically Ethan's, he was a temporary companion to help build on-screen chemistry for Ethan's upcoming film role. Yet, in the short time they had been together, an undeniable bond had formed. Charlie had a way of looking at Ethan as if to say, "I trust you." And for Ethan, who often felt the weight of loneliness despite his fame, Charlie was a warm reminder of the importance of connection. The station wasn't bustling as it often was during the day. Instead, it bore an air of vulnerability. Rows of makeshift shelters lined the walls, worn tarps, tattered blankets, and abandoned cardboard boxes providing inadequate refuge for those who had nowhere else to go. Ethan walked slowly, his gaze softening as he passed by these silent testaments to the city's inequities. For the homeless who occupied these corners, Ethan wasn't just another passerby. He was a quiet presence who, without fail, would pause to offer a kind word or a small token of aid. "Here you go," he said gently, kneeling to hand a few folded bills to an elderly woman huddled beneath a blanket. Her weathered face lit up with gratitude as she murmured a blessing. Ethan nodded, offering her a faint smile before moving on to the next person. He didn't do it for recognition. In fact, most didn't even realize who he was. To him, these small acts of kindness were a moral responsibility, a way to bring a sliver of hope to lives weighed down by misfortune. As Ethan neared the far end of the platform, he noticed a familiar figure slouched outside a sagging tent. It was Frank, a wiry man in his 60s who had been living in the station for as long as Ethan could remember. Frank was known for his resilient spirit and constant companion, Peanut, a feisty chihuahua who was rarely seen out of his arms. But tonight, something was different. Frank's face bore fresh bruises, and his shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. "Frank," Ethan called softly, crouching down to meet his gaze. "What happened? Where's Peanut?" At the mention of the dog's name, Frank's weathered composure crumbled. He pressed his trembling hands to his face, his voice cracking as he began to speak. "They took her," he choked out. "Those thugs, they've been coming around, demanding money. I couldn't pay. And his voice faltered as he pulled an empty, frayed dog collar from his pocket. The sight of it was enough to make Ethan's stomach churn. Frank continued, his words tumbling out in anguish. "She tried to protect me. My little Peanut. She bit one of them. And they kicked her. They took her. Said it was payment." Ethan felt his chest tighten with anger and sadness. The raw pain in Frank's voice was almost too much to bear. He reached out, placing a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Frank," he said sincerely. "Did you report this to the police?" Frank let out a bitter laugh. "The police? They don't care about us." "To them. We're just shadows. They won't lift a finger unless someone important tells them to. Ethan's jaw clenched as he absorbed Frank's words. The helplessness. The injustice, it was all too familiar to those forced to live on the margins. He looked down at Charlie, who had been sitting quietly by his side, and felt a renewed sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about Peanut or Frank. This was about the countless stories like theirs that went unheard and unseen. Frank's warning lingered as Ethan stood to leave. Be careful. Ethan, he said quietly. Those guys, they don't stop. They'll target anyone they think is weak. Ethan nodded, his mind racing with thoughts as he made his way to the platform. He couldn't shake the image of Frank clutching that empty collar, his hope stolen along with his companion. As the train approached, Ethan reached down to scratch behind Charlie's ears, his resolve hardening. Tonight wasn't just another night. It was the beginning of something far more significant than he could have imagined. As Ethan and Charlie waited for their train, the quiet hum of the subway seemed to grow heavier, as if the station itself could sense the unease brewing beneath its surface. Ethan absent-mindedly rubbed Charlie's head, his thoughts still lingering on Frank's story. He felt a pang of guilt for not being able to do more in that moment. But he promised himself that he wouldn't forget. Little did he know, the night had more trials in store for him. The faint sound of laughter interrupted his thoughts. Ethan glanced up to see three men swaggering down the platform. Their movements were sharp and erratic, their voices laced with the slurred confidence of too much alcohol. He instinctively tightened his grip on Charlie's leash, his military training whispering warnings in his mind. These were the types of men Frank had described, the ones who preyed on the vulnerable. Hey! Look at this guy, one of them sneered, his gaze locking onto Ethan. He was tall and lanky, with a jagged scar running down his cheek. What are you doing down here, buddy? Looking for a place to sleep? Ethan straightened his posture, his calm demeanor unwavering. Just waiting for my train, he replied, his voice steady. He hoped to defuse the situation before it escalated. But the men weren't interested in letting it go. The second man, stocky with a shaved head, smirked as his eyes drifted to Charlie. Nice dog you've got there. Looks like he's worth a pretty penny. Mind sharing? Ethan's jaw tightened. He's not for sale, he said firmly, pulling Charlie closer. The little beagle, sensing the tension, let out a soft growl. Feisty little thing, the third man, shorter but wiry, chuckled. Bet he'd fetch a good price. What do you think? Bowie? The tall one, apparently the leader, leaned in, his scarred face now inches from Ethan's. We don't care if he's for sale, he hissed. You're in our territory. Everything here belongs to us. So, hand him over. Ethan's instincts kicked in as he stepped back, putting himself between Charlie and the men. I don't want any trouble, he said evenly. But you're not taking him. The men exchanged glances before Bowie laughed. A harsh, guttural sound. Oh. You don't want trouble? Well, trouble's already here. Without warning, the stocky man lunged forward, shoving Ethan hard against the platform wall. The impact rattled him, but he refused to let go of Charlie's leash. The wiry man swung a baseball bat he'd been carrying, narrowly missing Ethan's shoulder as he ducked. Charlie barked furiously, pulling at the leash as if trying to protect his companion. Shut that mud up! Bowie snapped, his voice filled with venom. He grabbed at Charlie's leash, yanking it hard. Ethan fought back, gripping the leash with all his strength. But the 3-on-1 odds quickly overwhelmed him. A sharp blow to his ribs sent him stumbling, the pain searing through his side. Stop it! Ethan shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "He's just a dog." The men ignored him, their laughter growing more sinister as they turned their attention to Charlie. The little beagle barked and struggled, but the stocky man grabbed him roughly, holding him up by the leash as if he were nothing more than an object. "Please," Ethan begged, his voice breaking. "Let him go." Bowie stepped closer, his sneer widening. "Consider this payment for using our station," he spat. "And maybe next time, you'll know your place." With that, the men turned and walked away, dragging Charlie with them. Ethan scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his side, and tried to follow. But the wiry man swung the bat again, forcing him to stop in his tracks. "Stay down, or next time it'll be worse," the man growled, his eyes gleaming with malice. Ethan could only watch helplessly as the men disappeared into the shadows, Charlie's frantic yelps echoing in the distance. He fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he pressed them against the cold concrete. The weight of the moment crushed him, leaving him breathless and filled with anguish. He stayed there for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing with thoughts of what could happen to Charlie. The helplessness, the guilt, it was almost unbearable. Frank's words about Peanut echoed in his ears, and he couldn't shake the image of the little Chihuahua's empty collar. "I failed him," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. "I failed him." As he struggled to compose himself, the faint sound of footsteps approached. Ethan looked up to see a young woman, her phone in hand, staring at him with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked hesitantly. Ethan shook his head, his voice hollow. "They took my dog." The woman's face softened with concern, and she knelt beside him. "Did you see where they went?" "Maybe I can help." Ethan hesitated before nodding. "They went that way," he said, pointing toward the dimly lit tunnel. "But I don't know if I can catch them." The woman stood, determination flashing in her eyes. "Then let's find someone who can." She pulled out her phone and began dialing, her actions a small glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark night. As Ethan rose to his feet, a mix of pain and resolve etched into his features. He knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't give up on Charlie, no matter what it took. He would fight to bring him home. Ethan's body ached with every step, but his resolve only grew stronger. He followed the young woman, MIA, through the dimly lit subway tunnels. The faint sounds of the bustling city above were muted, replaced by the echo of their hurried footsteps and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. "I called the police," MIA said, glancing at Ethan as she kept pace beside him. "They're on their way. We just have to hold on until they get here." Ethan nodded, grateful for her help. But his mind was still racing. He replayed the moment the thugs had taken Charlie, the helpless yelp of the little dog, and the mocking laughter of his captors. The anger simmering beneath his exhaustion was a fire that refused to be extinguished. As they neared the storage alcove where many of the homeless people congregated, Ethan spotted a familiar figure stepping out of the shadows. It was Frank, his face etched with worry. "Ethan?" Frank called out, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What happened?" "They took Charlie," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "The same men who hurt you and took Peanut. They came after me, and I couldn't stop them." Frank's expression darkened, a mix of anger and determination settling over him. "We've been dealing with those bastards for months. They think they can terrorize us because no one cares about people like me. But they messed with the wrong man this time." Frank turned to the small group of homeless individuals gathered nearby. They had overheard the conversation, their faces reflecting a shared sense of indignation. One by one, they stepped forward, forming a loose circle around Ethan and Frank. "Where did they take him?" the woman asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "They went toward the old storage area near the north platform," Ethan replied, his tone urgent. "But I couldn't follow them. There were 3 of them. And they were armed." Another man, older but with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "I've seen them before," he said. "They use that area as their hideout. If we move quickly, we can corner them before they disappear." Ethan hesitated, glancing around the group. "I appreciate your help, but I don't want anyone else getting hurt." Frank placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We've been hurt enough. Ethan, this is about more than just Charlie. It's about standing up to people who think they can walk all over us. And tonight, we're not letting them win." The group moved with quiet determination, navigating the maze of tunnels toward the storage area. Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude for these strangers who were risking themselves for Charlie, and guilt for dragging them into danger. But their resolve was unshakable, and their solidarity gave him strength. As they approached the storage alcove, the sound of voices drifted through the air. The thugs were laughing, their tone smug and triumphant. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at Frank, who nodded silently, and then at Mia, who had quietly positioned herself behind the group, ready to call for backup if needed. The thugs were gathered around a makeshift table, their stolen spoil spread out before them. Charlie was tied to a post nearby, his small body trembling as he whimpered softly. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight, a mixture of relief that Charlie was alive and rage at the way he was being treated. Before Ethan could move, Frank stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Let the dog go." The thugs froze, their laughter silenced as they turned to face the group. "But we, the leader?" sneered as he stepped forward, his scar catching the light. Well, if it isn't the old man and his new friend. Back for more." "Who?" "This ends now," Frank said, his voice steady. "You've terrorized us long enough. We're not afraid of you anymore." Bowie laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it as he glanced at the growing group of people behind Frank. "What? You think a bunch of homeless bums can stop us? You've got nothing. We've got each other," Frank replied, his tone defiant. "And that's more than you'll ever have." Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and firm. "And you've got the police on their way. This is over." The thugs exchanged uneasy glances. The bravado they had carried earlier began to crack under the weight of the crowd's unified presence. But Bowie wasn't ready to back down. He grabbed a baseball bat, raising it threateningly. "Stay back, or you'll regret it," he growled. Ethan's military instincts kicked in. He moved quickly, stepping between Bowie and the group. "I've faced worse than you," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "And I'm not afraid." For a tense moment, it seemed like Bowie might attack. But the sound of approaching sirens broke the standoff. The thugs froze, their confidence evaporating as red and blue lights flashed in the distance. Within moments, police officers stormed the alcove, weapons drawn and voices commanding the thugs to drop their weapons. The confrontation ended as quickly as it had begun. The thugs were handcuffed and led away, their protests drowned out by the officers' commands. Ethan rushed to Charlie, untying the little dog and scooping him into his arms. Charlie barked and licked Ethan's face, his tail wagging furiously despite his ordeal. As the officers gathered statements and collected evidence, Ethan turned to Frank and the others. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Frank smiled. The first genuine smile Ethan had seen from him. "You reminded us that we're not invisible," he said. "And that's something none of us will forget." That night, as Ethan and Charlie made their way back home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the evening had been harrowing, but they had also shown him the power of empathy, solidarity, and hope in the face of cruelty and injustice. It was the connections between people, the willingness to stand together, that made all the difference. And as Charlie curled up beside him, safe and sound, Ethan knew he would carry the lessons of that night with him forever. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of bravery and empathy. We hope this story inspired you to see the value in standing together, no matter the odds. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Empathy Stories for more heartwarming and powerful tales. Together, we can spread kindness and hope to every corner of the world. See you in the next story.